Most people are afraid of walking into a silent house. I walked into mine too early, and I would have given anything for it to be empty. What I found instead changed how I see my own blood forever, and I promise you this: some betrayals don't just break your heart, they rewrite who you are. Let me tell you something about marriage after more than 2 decades. When you spend 23 years sharing the same space with someone, the same routines, the same habits, even the same annoying little arguments about things like toothpaste caps and bathroom shelves, you develop something deeper than love. You develop instinct. It is not something you can explain logically, but you feel it when something shifts. That Tuesday, before I even parked my car, I felt it creeping into my chest like a warning I could not ignore. I was not supposed to be home that day. I had been in Denver for a business conference, but it wrapped up early due to some unexpected cancellation. Instead of wasting another night alone in a hotel room, I booked the first flight back without telling Cassandra. I thought I would surprise her, maybe pick up her favorite Thai food, maybe sit down for dinner like we used to before life became schedules and screens. I was in a good mood, which now feels almost cruel looking back. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing that caught my attention was my son's car sitting there. Preston did not just drop by unannounced. He was 26, married, living across town in an apartment I helped him set up. He barely visited even when we planned it in advance, so seeing his car parked at my house in the middle of a weekday felt wrong in a way I could not immediately explain. I sat there for a moment, staring at it, trying to make sense of something that refused to make sense. I grabbed my bag and walked to the front door, already feeling that tightness in my chest growing heavier with each step. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, but not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful. This was different. It felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. That was when I saw Preston and his wife, Lindsay, sitting on the couch in the living room. They were not watching television. They were not scrolling through their phones. They were just sitting there, stiff and still, like people waiting for news they already knew. Preston looked at me first, and that moment still plays in my head like a broken record. There was no surprise on his face, no confusion, no reaction at all. Just a slow blink and a look that felt calculated, like he had already prepared himself for this exact moment. Lindsay smiled, but it was not a real smile. It was the kind of expression that does not belong in a room filled with tension. I asked where Cassandra was, trying to keep my voice steady even though everything inside me was starting to unravel. He told me she had been taken to the hospital that morning, said it like he was reading from a script. He mentioned the name of the hospital, said she was stable, but I barely heard anything after that. My body moved before my mind could catch up. Within seconds, I was back in my car, driving faster than I should have, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding me together. On the way, I called my best friend Kurt. He has known me longer than anyone else in my life, long enough to hear what I am not saying. When I told him what I had seen, the silence on the other end spoke louder than anything. Then he told me to stay calm, which was almost insulting given the situation, but I knew what he meant. He could already sense that something was wrong in a way that went beyond a medical emergency. At the hospital, I met a doctor who explained Cassandra's condition in a calm, professional tone that somehow made it worse. She said there were signs of toxicity in Cassandra's system, levels that suggested something had been building over time rather than appearing suddenly. That word building hit me hard. It implied intention, repetition, something deliberate happening over weeks or even months. When I finally saw Cassandra, I was not prepared for how fragile she looked. This was a woman who had always been strong, outspoken, impossible to ignore in any room. Now she looked drained, like something had slowly taken pieces of her away. I sat beside her, holding her hand, promising her that I would not leave until I understood what had happened. Back in the waiting area, Preston and Lindsay had arrived. They tried to talk, but I stopped them before they could start. Something inside me had already begun shifting from confusion to focus. Instead of arguing, I stepped aside and pulled out my phone. Quietly, methodically, I began locking every account they had access to. Every shared financial entry point disappeared within minutes. When their phones started lighting up with notifications, I watched their reactions closely. Lindsay's composure cracked first, and that told me more than any words could. That night, sitting alone in the hospital parking lot, I realized something important. Denial is comfortable, but it is also dangerous. It lets you ignore the truth until it is too late. I decided right then that I was done ignoring anything. When I called Kurt again, he said something that stuck with me. He told me to think carefully about who had consistent access to Cassandra's food, her drinks, her medication. Not once or twice, but every single day. That was when everything started connecting. Months earlier, Cassandra had injured her ankle, and Preston had suggested that Lindsay help her in the mornings. It had seemed like a kind gesture at the time. Now it felt like the beginning of something far darker. I went back inside and confronted them with simple questions about what exactly they had been giving Cassandra. They could not answer. The silence between them said everything. Over the next several hours, I went through financial records, and what I found confirmed my worst fears. There were small withdrawals, consistent and calculated, adding up to thousands over time. This was not random behavior. It was planned, careful, intentional. When I shared this with Kurt, he said something that made my stomach drop. He said that kind of pattern does not come from desperation alone. It comes from someone thinking several steps ahead. The following morning, the doctor confirmed that Cassandra had been exposed to a substance over time, something that could be administered through food or supplements without being easily detected. That was the moment everything became undeniable. I made calls, locked everything down legally and financially, and removed any remaining access they had. When Preston finally messaged me asking why he could not access anything anymore, I responded with a single sentence telling him he should have thought about that before involving my wife. It was the first time I allowed myself to fully accept what was happening. Later that week, Kurt uncovered something that explained the motive behind everything. Cassandra had quietly updated her life insurance policy, removing Preston as a beneficiary and redirecting the funds to a charitable foundation she had been building. The policy was worth millions, Preston had found out. Instead of accepting it or talking to her, he chose a different path, one that I still struggle to understand even now. From that point forward, everything became a matter of precision. My attorney gathered evidence, timelines, records, and statements. Every detail was documented, every piece of the puzzle put into place. When Preston and Lindsay came to the hospital pretending to be concerned, I told them calmly that the police were already on their way. Watching their expressions change in that moment is something I will never forget. They were arrested shortly after, right there in the parking lot, still holding the flowers they had brought as part of their act. The investigation moved quickly after that. The evidence was overwhelming, and the case did not take long to resolve. What mattered most to me, though, was not the legal outcome. It was the fact that Cassandra survived. 3 months later, she walked back into our home, stronger, still recovering but very much herself. The first thing she did was comment on the color of the walls, which somehow felt like the most comforting thing in the world. It meant she was back. It meant we had not lost her. Looking back now, I realize I do not wish that house had been empty that day. I am grateful I came home when I did. If I had been even one day later, the outcome might have been very different. What I do wish is that my son had made different choices, that he had been the man I believed he was. But you cannot control what people become when no one is watching. You can only control how you respond when the truth finally comes to light. I walked into that house, I saw what needed to be seen, and I made sure that the people responsible faced exactly what they had done. Sometimes that is the only justice you get, and sometimes it is enough.